This episode is brought to you by Rakuten. If you're shopping while working, eating, or even listening to this podcast, then you know and love the thrill of the hunt. But are you getting the thrill of the best deals? Rakuten shoppers do. They get the brands they love with the most savings and cash back. And you can get it too. Start getting cash back at your favorite stores like Samsung, Expedia, and Sephora. And even stack sales on top of cash back. It's easy to use, and you get your cash back through PayPal or check. The idea is simple. Stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cash back. Download the free Rakuten app and never miss a deal. Or go to Rakuten.com to start getting the most bang for your buck. That's Rakuten.
Life is made up of many gorgeous moments. Cherish them all, big and small, with Blue Nile. Whether it's for yourself or a loved one, Blue Nile's unrivaled selection of expertly crafted fine jewelry and statement pieces help make all your moments sparkle. Blue Nile's experts are on hand to guide you, and their diamond guarantee ensures you get the highest quality at the best price. Celebrate a life well lived in the most radiant way and save up to 30% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
Hello? Yes, this is Simon Brew. Yeah, I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine. The Film Stories podcast? Yeah, this is it. And a very warm welcome.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always. That's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, it's given away in the title. I'm here to talk of the stories of films, and I tend to talk about production stories, marketing stories, release stories, development stories, all the ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films that I tend to cover on this podcast lean more towards the mainstream than anything else. They're films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. I try really hard not to do snark. I try really hard too not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation that it's incredibly hard to get a film off the ground. In each episode of the podcast, I cover two different productions. In this case, one that's got made and one that, to date, has not. So let's just crack on with those. I'm going to set it up with a trailer, a clip from the trailer of the first of the movies I'm going to talk about. I'll come to the story, and it's a long story. The other side of this.
Tell me something. You can go anywhere. Another timeline. Another universe. So why do you want to stay and fight to save this one?
Because this is the world where my mom lives. I'm not gonna lose her again. Time has a pattern that it can't help reliving. Different people, different worlds, drawn to each other like magnets. It's my face.
So that then was a clip from the trailer of The Flash, a movie released in 2023, directed by Andy Muschietti, screenplay by Christina Hodson, story credited to John Francis Daly, Jonathan Goldstein, Joby Harold, based on characters from DC, and starring Ezra Miller, Sasha Calle, Michael Shannon, Ron Livingston, Maribel Verdú, Kiersey Clemens, and Michael Keaton, amongst many, many other people. Right, deep breath then, because if we're going to the story of the DC character The Flash, well, we go all the way back to the 1980s really, when it turns to the idea of a film being made of the character. So The Flash had been introduced in comic form in 1939, and it was in the 1980s that Jeff Loeb, who'd penned movies such as Commando and Teen Wolf, heard of them, Burglar, not heard of that, was then looking to do a Flash movie for Warner Brothers. Brothers. Now, at that point, the Flash is the alter ego of assorted characters, but Barry Allen is the one we'll be concentrating on here. And Loeb didn't get very far, really, with this. He worked on it, but as he would tell Variety, in the end, the people that were in comics didn't understand who I was or what I was doing. So this was the 1980s, and he says, I didn't come up through the trenches. I didn't know any editors, and the president of the company said, work with this guy. So it wasn't really meant to be. Warner Brothers instead would get a Batman movie to the screen at the end of the 1980s. That didn't turn out too badly, really. For Jeff Loeb, he would go on to the TV show Smallville and work with the Superman character. So it didn't work out too badly there either. What it meant was the Flash was going back on the pile for a little bit, and it wasn't until 2004 that he zipped back near the top of it. See what I did there? Now, David S. Goyer at this point had put together a script for Christopher Nolan's Batman reboot, Batman Begins. It was unreleased at the end of 2004. It was going into cinemas in the summer of 2005. But 6 months ahead of the release of Batman Begins, there was already some degree of confidence with it. And the studio thus hired Goyer, who'd been burned a little bit, well, no understatement there, by 2004's Blade Trinity, to write, produce and direct a feature movie of The Flash. And as he told Variety in a different article to the one I quoted before, Flash is my favourite of the properties. He said that I think the character of the Flash, who moves faster than the speed of light, opens itself up to rich cinematic and story ideas. And now Warner Brothers was getting quite confident with its DC movies by the mid-2000s as well. This was pre the Marvel Cinematic Universe, remember? There was an era where that did not exist. And in this particular moment was a Warner Brothers one, that the X-Men films had been doing really well at Fox, but they were coming to an end. And so Warner Brothers had picked up the mantle with 2005's Batman Begins in production, 2006's Superman Returns not far behind. Its two biggest DC characters both set to triumphantly return to the big screen, as it turned out, with varying results, which I've discussed elsewhere on this podcast in previous episodes. But Warner Brothers was clearly leaning back into its comic book properties. It did detect which way the market was going and was keen to act on that, hence resurrecting the idea of a Flash project. However, as much as Goyer was looking to bring Ryan Reynolds in as the Flash, I mean, he cast Ryan Reynolds in Blade Trinity. How far ahead of the game was he there? He never really got that far with the project. That at this stage, Ryan Reynolds was a supporting player. I mean, it's remarkable how many supporting roles Ryan Reynolds really high-profile supporting roles was knocking up just in the last 10 years, really, before he's hit the power level that he's at now. And so Reynolds alone wasn't going to get the Flash off the ground. And then, in spite of the success of Batman Begins, and with 2008's The Dark Knight on the stove as well, it was in early 2007 that the Flash movie fell apart, at least this iteration of it. That Warner Brothers was enjoying the success of Batman Begins, and it had raised its confidence levels right back up again. And so it was digging into its DC catalogue. It was exploring the idea of a Justice League movie, again, ahead of what Marvel was up to at this point. This was also an era where Joss Whedon was working on a Wonder Woman film, and in 2007 he departed that as well. But as Goyer would explain to MoviePhone, he said the God's honest truth is that Warner Brothers and myself simply couldn't agree on what would make for a cool Flash film. Goyer said, I'm quite proud of the screenplay I turned in. I threw my heart into it. I genuinely think it would have been the basis of a groundbreaking film. But as of now, the studio's heading off in a completely different direction. I expect you'll hear some new developments on that front shortly. You were right there, David Goyer. We absolutely did, because get this, the next person through the door was Sean Levy. Now, Sean Levy is the person who has just directed Deadpool and Wolverine, which has just grossed over $1 billion at the box office at the point this has been recorded. But as early as February 2007, he was announced as the director of a different comic book movie, The Flash. This was coming off the back of the success he was enjoying with the first Night at the Museum film. Do you remember that trilogy of movies? No one seems to talk about them so much anymore. Headlined by Ben Stiller, with quite a cast in all of those as well. And Sean Levy was behind the director. Well, he was in the director's chair for the first film. It had been a hit. Fox thus wanted a Night at the Museum too. So Sean Levy was really incumbent there. And it would eventually turn into a trilogy, of course, but still, February 2007, he was doing The Flash. Warner Brothers, meanwhile, was bringing in George Miller just a few weeks later to make Justice League Mortal, a really prescient team-up movie that would have had The Flash in it as well. Chris Brancato had been brought in to work on Sean Levy on the Flash film, but by November 2007, 9 months on, here we were going, it was all change all over again, because Levy went off to make Night at the Museum 2. Fox wanted that. That had a clearer way to a green light, and off he popped. And so next on board, that'd be David Dobkin, who had enjoyed a success with the comedy hit Wedding Crashers, was just finishing up a different project for Warner Brothers, Fred Claus. So he was on board. Craig Wright this time was going to write the script. But still, even as Reuters was reporting this news, the Justice League film was planning the Flash as a major character. There was an incoming writers' strike about to happen in America that threatened to derail many projects. And I mean, producer Charles Roven actually confirmed at the start of January 2008 that in the case of The Flash, they had a director, they had a writer, but now the whole project was being held up by the writers' strike. Then Dan Mazzou go on to pen Wrath of the Titans and Fast and Furious 10 to people like me. He was brought on once the strike lifted, and so Warner Brothers was key. I mean, it was certainly getting through a fair amount of personnel on the movie, but crucially, it wasn't giving up on the idea of bringing The Flash to the big screen. Nor was it giving up on the idea of bringing The Flash to the small screen either, coming to that very shortly. So, Warner Brothers was still pumping money into comic book movies. The Dark Knight grossed $1 billion. And so, I mean, that was seismic at that point. We talk, I mean, $1 billion is a lot of money now. So certainly a lot of money to me. But at this stage, the idea of a Batman film making $1 billion on its initial cinema run, I mean, by God, I mean, that's new. And so Warner Brothers then threw lots of resources into a Green Lantern film directed by Martin Campbell. And that jumped the queue. Ahead of The Flash. In fact, the writers of the Green Lantern movie, Greg Berlanti, Michael Green, Mark Guggenheim, they were then brought aboard to write a version of The Flash as Warner Brothers moved into the 2010s. But then things changed again. The wheels really started to come off Warner Brothers and comic book movies. That the Green Lantern movie was a hugely expensive film that, starring Ryan Reynolds, wouldn't you know it? That, I mean, it did business, but it certainly didn't do anything threatening a profit on its original release, so that was a problem. Superman Returns, well, that in 2006, that had been expensive, had just about broken even. But the idea of Superman Returns 2, well, it wasn't foregone as much as its director, the director of Superman Returns, and we talked about him before, Bryan Singer, had suggested a sequel where he went full on Wrath of Khan. Warner Brothers wasn't sure that it had the right approach for a Superman movie. It was considering doing a complete top to bottom reboot, bringing something that just detached Superman from the tone of the Richard Donner movies. And so Superman Returns 2, which was going to be very expensive, that was stuck. Green Lantern had struggled. Marvel was bursting into life. And the year that Warner Brothers would release The Dark Knight Rises was the year that the first Avengers film hit. And, well, it was clear what trajectory Marvel was on at that point. And so by 2013, Warner Brothers had now watched the Avengers cross $1 billion. And so it wanted a fast track to a shared universe of its own. The George Miller project had long fallen apart off the back of, well, in the midst of the writer's strike, really. But Warner Brothers was going to have another go. And so it wasn't going to take the Marvel approach of carefully seeding this universe across a few films. It was just going to go for it. Absolute fast track. And so the DC Extended Universe was announced in 2013. And the idea was, as part of that, The Flash would become part of the Justice League film that was being done. And The Flash would also get a standalone movie in 2018 as part of the DC Extended Universe. You're following all of this, with Ezra Miller cast in the title role. But again, there was some duality here, not just the obvious of, playing a character who's got an alter ego, because The Flash was appearing in a successful TV series for Warner Brothers as well. In fact, The Flash on the small screen was doing incredibly well, thank you very much, with Grant Gustin zipping around this time. And, I mean, question marks were inevitably raised about, well, are you going to capitalise on the TV show? Is it going to link to the TV show? Will there be anything there at all? And Warner Brothers was very insistent that these were separate things, that Miller's Flash was different from the Flash we were seeing with Grant Gustin. Of course, comic books allow this kind of thing. Slightly harder to put across on a cinema screen where you're getting one film, every few months perhaps, as opposed to a comic every week. The word multiverse was being thrown around at one stage. Who come up with madness like that? Meanwhile, Zack Snyder was brought in to oversee a bunch of DC films. This is all relevant to where we're going with this particular story. And so he pressed ahead with 2016's Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, in which Ezra Miller would debut the Flash. In fact, the Flash introduction was one of the most acclaimed films of Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, even though the Justice League characters, it bears comparison with what Marvel did. Marvel seeded characters such as Thor and Captain America on the big screen in carefully crafted individual movies. The Flash, Wonder Woman, characters like that, the latest iterations were debuted in Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, courtesy of someone just looking through some computer folders. The parallels didn't really work too well for Warner Brothers there, did they? That notwithstanding, there was now an appetite for quite a few of these Warner Brothers DC characters. So there were problems that Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice did good business, but it didn't break $1 billion, and Marvel's films were breaking $1 billion, but Warner Brothers films weren't breaking $1 billion, and DC wasn't enjoying the success and all of that. Zack Snyder then went straight into his Justice League film, of course. The story of that ill-fated endeavour will be told at some point in a future episode of this podcast, once I've got about 15 years to go through it all. But the Flash standalone movie was somehow still working through, still working through the system, and wasn't killed off by, let's just say, some relatively tepid reactions to what Warner Brothers had been up to. Now, James Wan at this stage was famously offered either The Flash or Aquaman to turn into feature films. He chose Aquaman with Jason Momoa, and what was able to sit back as his film grossed over $1 billion at the global box office. That's how you do it, Warner Brothers, although the sequel came nowhere near that level of interest or money. Phil Lord and Chris Miller, meanwhile, they were then not lined up to potentially direct the Flash film, the latest on the conveyor belt, but they opted to go off and make Solo a Star Wars story instead. Another film I should cover on this podcast. Phil Lord and Christopher Miller did not finish making Star Wars, Solo Star Wars. They didn't finish that film, let's go with that. Again, a very well-known story. So then the idea was that Seth Grahame-Smith was going to come in and take some of the work that Lord and Miller had done and direct the Flash movie. He was next along the line. But then an inverse article from around the same time, revealed, even at this point, where are we now? About April 2016, I think it was, when Seth Grahame-Smith left the film in the end. And there was talk at that point of a trilogy of Flash movies. And so that was the plan, with a 2018 release still just about holding for the first of the films. And so who was next through the line? Glad you asked. That would be Rick Famuyiwa. Now, he signed up to direct, having enjoyed success with the film Dope. That had gone down particularly well, and he would stay involved with The Flash until October 2017. And by this stage, it actually looked like it was going to happen, because the film was getting ready for a shoot in London. We got to a point where sets were being built in 2017. And then, what do you know? Some creative differences came in. The enemy of the modern comic book movie, a good old-fashioned creative difference. And so the idea was that the Flash would have seeded a major villain for the broader DC world, but again, that was not to be. Still, Famuyiwa worked on the script for the film, and it was in September 2016. He posted on social media he completed the latest draft, was talking then about pre-production work being undertaken. But it wasn't too long. I think it was basically October 2016, not 2017. I apologize. That he was out, and this release date that they planned of March 2018 just wasn't going to happen. And Famayuma would explain to The Hollywood Reporter that, quote, I pitched a version of the film in line with my voice, humour and heart. And he did say, while it's disappointing we couldn't come together creatively on the project, I remain grateful for the opportunity. He said, I'll continue to look for opportunities to tell stories that speak to a fresh, generational, topical and multicultural point of view. I wish Warner Brothers, DC, John Berg, Jeff Johns and Ezra Miller, still involved, all the best as they continue their journey into the Speed Force. That's nice. Now, by this stage, Ezra Miller was in demand elsewhere because they'd been cast as one of the key faces in another franchise that Warner Brothers hoped was going to run for a very long time. The Fantastic Beasts movies spun out from the Harry Potter films. These were the first films for which J.K. Rowling directly wrote screenplays, and she had revealed that there were plans for 5 of these movies. Even though the first one hadn't turned out particularly well, they were pressing ahead with more of them, and Ezra Miller was going to get more and more heavily involved. Now, this created an inevitable scheduling problem. And so Warner Brothers really just hit the reset button on The Flash in January 2017. Now, this was when Joby Harold came in to do a rewrite from scratch of the movie. The idea was get this in place by the time that Miller's schedule has freed up, and we'll have a director by that point. We could use a director. That might be quite helpful. And, I mean, some surprising choices, actually. Robert Zemeckis and Matthew Vaughn bubbled to the top. Perhaps Vaughn isn't surprising, but Robert Zemeckis doing a franchise, a superhero movie, is part of a cinematic universe. It's not really a name you would necessarily instantly link. Jordan Peele had been linked, Mark Webb, Ben Affleck had been linked to, but it was Zemeckis who for a little while looked like he was going to be the incumbent, that the film by this point was now Flashpoint. It wasn't The Flash. But then, as we went into 2018, it wasn't going to be Robert Zemeckis. In fact, Zemeckis went off to do a version of Pinocchio for Disney Plus that I don't know anyone who's watched, really. He also did The Witches remake for Warner Brothers before he's back now doing some more ambitious stuff. He's got the film Here out just like a month or two away from when this podcast is released. By the start of 2018, inspired choice, though, John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein. Now, this is the pair who had successfully brought Game Night to life. Now, Game Night is a film I go on about a lot on this podcast. I absolutely adore Game Night. It's very, very funny and really well done as well. They look like quite an inspired choice to do the Flash movie. And so now they were on board. They were going to write and direct. And so they're still in pre-production. But, I mean, as we went into 2018, they were still on board writing and directing. However, now Warner Brothers was moving forward with the third Fantastic Beasts movie after the second Fantastic Beasts movie had been completed, not particularly liked, but made a bit of money. And Ezra Miller was thus required to go make Fantastic Beasts 3. And so now the earliest we were going to get The Flash was 2021. Francis Daley and Goldstein, I mean, they didn't last too much longer on the film. In fact, Ezra Miller and Grant Morrison went off and had a go at the script at one point as the endless wait for the movie just kept going. Miller apparently hadn't been happy with the lighter tone of the screenplays that they'd been reading. It wasn't where they felt that a Flash movie should go, and thus got their pen out and put together something that didn't really pass an awful lot of muster with Warner Brothers, though. And what do you know? In the end, John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein, they went elsewhere as a result of, have a guess, creative differences. More creative differences. Nothing but creative differences. In fact, they went off to do the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which I've covered fairly recently on this podcast. It proved to be a very wise choice as well. I think that film is really, really terrific and an awful lot of fun. Where are we now? July 2019. Let's talk about Christina Hodson, because she had penned the Bumblebee movie, arguably the best live-action Transformers film, I think. I really think it's a really, really fun, really entertaining movie. She'd written the script for that. That was a good start. She'd also written the script for the incoming Harley Quinn movie, Birds of Prey, which was due in 2020. And so the script for that had certainly passed muster. And then alongside her, Andy Muschietti had been enjoying success with a film of his own, that he had directed the first movie of, the first part of the remake movie. God, I've made a muddle of that. Stephen King's It, the new take on that. Muschietti had directed It Part 1. It Part 1 had proven a huge success, a really spooky, really successful film. And as such, wouldn't you know it, there was now the next candidate to direct The Flash. So Muschietti had to finish It Part 2. That was the immediate priority, but still there was a point now where it felt like things were coming together, that Barbara Muschietti would come in to produce as well. And as the Hollywood Reporter would note, at this point in the middle of 2019, Miller, who has played the character since 2016's Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice, favoured a darker approach, while Goldstein and Daly, the duo who wrote Spider-Man Homecoming, the hugely successful Spider-Man Homecoming, wanted the opposite. With the new director and producer now confirmed for November 2019, in came a new release date, July the 1st, 2022. Spoiler, they wouldn't hit that. Filming was now going to get going in 2021, and then in came pandemic. You're familiar with the pandemic, so I'm not going to go into great detail on quite what happened there. However, for the purposes of this story, that not the release date back further. But we learned that Michael Keaton was in talks to reprise the role of Bruce Wayne / Batman for the first time since 1992's Batman Returns. In fact, he would also be reprising the role in a Batgirl movie. Yeah, coming to that as well. There was at least, though, some momentum that it was getting to the point where they could have conversations about the casting of the film and bringing cameos in, and names such as Ben Affleck were being linked. A cameo was offered to Ray Fisher, who'd played Cyborg but in the Justice League film, but it's worth noting that Ray Fisher had extreme dissatisfaction with his treatment at the hands of Warner Brothers that led to quite a public spat, really. Fisher made allegations against Joss Whedon on the set of Justice League and criticised DC film bosses too. There had been plans for a Cyborg movie, not to be. He was reportedly offered a cameo, or at least contacted about a cameo in The Flash. That was also not to be. By autumn 2020, it was clear we were heading for some kind of multiverse here. And even as the release date was pushed to November in fact, it was now November 2022. So it had been batting backwards and forwards a little bit. Filming was at a point where it could get going in 2021. That Sasha Calle was brought in as Supergirl. Billy Crudup was coming. In fact, the cast that I just read right at the start was falling into place, along with some cameos as well. And remarkably, the film could finally, remember this story started all the way back in the 1980s, the film could finally go before the cameras here in the UK in April of 2021. Now, the shoot took place under COVID restrictions and COVID safety conditions, which knocked the already tasty budget very, very much further north. That the final production budget for The Flash is somewhere between $200 and $220 million. But they got it shot. Warner Brothers had a film. And so, there wasn't too much drama around the shoot itself. That there was an accident on the shoot, an injury to a camera operator that was reported. But in terms of the drama of making the film itself, it was relatively quiet. There wasn't an awful lot of tittle-tattle going around in the trade press while the film was shooting, and it was pretty much left to go on, and Muschietti could make his film. Heading into the middle of 2022, the scheduled reshoot work was getting underway, but this is the year where everything really became a conundrum for Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers was in the process of merging with, it was now going to be Warner Brothers Discovery. And in would come a man who's not known for his love of movies, but David Zaslav, who at the time this is recording, continues to head up Warner Brothers Discovery. And Zaslav has earned a reputation for, let's just say, not being particularly one to cherish creative work. Under his stewardship at Warner Brothers, completed films have been deleted so that Warner Brothers can reclaim the tax rather than face the cost of releasing the film. Now, the consequence of that is that if you take the tax break, you can never release the film. And so, under Zaslav's stewardship, Warner Brothers has opted to effectively destroy completed films altogether, unreleased, just to help its bottom line. Now, you may have different views on that to me. I try and be very, very neutral and not state too many opinions on this podcast. I think that's an absolute sham of a thing to do, and I think it deserves to be hung round his neck for all time. But that's just my opinion. In the case of The Flash, then, Zaslav was overseeing a Warner Brothers discovery that was unsure quite what to do with it. And part of a significant part of the reason for that centered around the star of the movie, Ezra Miller. Now, this has been widely reported elsewhere, but it is important for this story and the problems that really hit The Flash in 2022, because there had already been allegations and controversies around Ezra Miller. However, it was in 2022 that, things really ramped up. Already before 2022, a video had surfaced of Miller alleging to choke a woman and throwing her to the ground. They took a trip to Hawaii in March 2022. Miller was arrested there, facing charges of disorderly conduct and harassment. A restraining order was granted against the actor. Then a second-degree assault accusation followed, and allegations continued throughout the year as well, again, widely available to read online. And against this backdrop, Warner Brothers was facing questions as to what it was going to do with Miller and what it was going to do with The Flash. Now, the eventual answer, as it turned out, was pretty much nothing, because Warner Brothers did consider a release date delay, and don't forget this also affected the third Fantastic Beasts movie as well. There had been conversations about sending the movie to streaming. There had been suspicions that the whole thing would be deleted altogether. However, the early test screenings had come back incredibly well, and Zaslav needed a hit and was looking for a horse to back, and there was underlying confidence that the Flash movie was really good. And so even though the studio was deleting other films at this point, I say it in such a matter-of-fact way, I still find it absolutely incredible. That notwithstanding, the Flash found itself exempt from the cull. This was even as Warner Brothers was changing yet again its DC strategy, because with The Flash in post-production, in came Peter Safran and James Gunn to oversee a brand new 8-10-year plan for DC movies and TV shows. Now, part of that was they inherited a slate of pretty much, or near as damn it, completed DC movies. So there's the second Aquaman film, there's Blue Beetle in there. And here in the midst of it all was The Flash. And so, they were making really positive noises about the film. That there was, it was strange to see executives at a studio going so out there, really, just in particularly taxing times, to say that this is, almost saying that this is the one, this is something incredibly special. And you've got to hype your film up, I get that, but there was a sense that, boy, you're painting a bit of a target on your back here. Also, they did so against a backdrop of these allegations swirling around and a real discomfort over Ezra Miller. And would Ezra Miller form part even of the publicity campaign for the film? How on earth do you promote the movie when the star of your film is, the headlines they are generating are not the ones you would want if you're looking to sell tickets for a film? I think that's about the most gentle way that I could put it. Warner Brothers, to the surprise of a few, I think, decided to double down, basically. Now, it's worth noting that right the way through the production, as Warner Brothers' long-term strategy for its DC films had evolved, there have been changes to just how The Flash would knit together with the rest of the characters and the rest of the films and the rest of the stories that Warner Brothers was looking to tell. Would this cameo go in? Would they need to delete that callback? Would that see all these little, tiny details that have been seeded in with the assumption that there's going to be another Wonder Woman movie with Gal Gadot, that there was potentially going to be further adventures for other characters that have been put forward. And so the film became a little bit of a football to that degree. And even going into 2023, new cameos were being shot. for the film. And it's almost as though Warner Brothers got part of its confidence from seeing the massive multiverse driven success of Sony and Marvel's Spider-Man film. This would be the third Spider-Man film with Tom Holland in the lead role, Spider-Man No Way Home. That had grossed billions at a point where films were not grossing billions, and maybe that's the kind of strategy that Warner Brothers should lean on. The Flash, well, this was a film that seemed to tick that box. What could possibly go wrong? It got to a point where the release date moved forward even. It was now coming out on June the 16th, 2023 in the US. It was going to get a flashy premiere in Hollywood just a few days before that. And there was talk ahead of the release of massive box office returns. I mean, the early estimates for box office were really, really exciting for the studio. I mean, this was potentially going to be a big monster hit. Could it be a big monster hit? Well, here we go. The film went before critics, and the critical response to the movie, considering all the word of mouth ahead of time had been ecstatic, and the word coming out at the premiere, never believe tweets of people coming out of a premiere, I should know, was quite strong. The reviews were pretty good. I have to say, I've struggled with a few comic book movies of late, but I did find The Flash a good, fun film. For at least a good hour of it, I was really into it. So the reviews were, there were nothing to alarm Warner Brothers, but also when you've gone out saying effectively this is a really special film, that you kind of need the reviews to reflect that a little bit more, and they weren't doing so. So that's factor one to bring in here. The second thing is, well, there was false confidence in the box office that even though the reviews came in okay, they came in well enough in the end. The idea that this might gross $100 million on its opening weekend, that was looking a bit troublesome at this stage. Could it really do that? Don't know. Didn't look like it. And Warner Brothers, it almost gave the sense that it was gambling hard on the film, and it was a gamble that didn't in the end really pay off. So let's take a look at what happened. It went into cinemas that weekend, June the 16th to the 18th, and the studio was spending a ton of money pushing it. Really heavy promotion of the film. I mean, as you would expect for a summer blockbuster, but it did appear that the marketing had been absolutely ramped up. There was a premiere that Miller did go along to, and even though Miller was kept out of the firing line of the press junket, they were there for the premiere, and so they weren't deleted from the promotional campaign for the film by any measure at all. The film's opening in the US of $55 million on its opening weekend, though, was a monumental disappointment to Warner Brothers. It was, it came, about 6-7 weeks after the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which had crashed past $340 million at the US box office. And there was The Flash with $55 million opening. The Super Mario Brothers movie made $572 million in the US by this point. And, have you watched it? In second place, the weekend that The Flash came out, another one that looked like a disappointment, Pixar's Elemental. Now, that proved to be quite an interesting story because that was written off as a flop fairly early on, and then it built its box office over a long period of time. In the case of The Flash, Warner Bros. Knew that was unlikely to be the case, that as much as comic book movies do get quite a lot of repeat business, you're still going to get a good chunk of your cash in the opening weekend. And so the chart was The Flash at number 1 with $55 million, Elemental number 2, $29 million. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was up to $279 million on its third weekend. Transformers Rise of the Beast, $101 million, its second weekend. Disney's Little Mermaid film, regarded as a financial disappointment, was past $250 million in the US alone on its fourth weekend. The important thing here is films were making money. This wasn't a case that blockbusters didn't exist. This wasn't trying to release a film in 2021, releasing a film in 2023, a very, very different proposition. But The Flash was about to fall. On its second weekend, it lost 72.5% of its business. A staggering amount, really, that is. That usually, I mean, we're used to the idea now that a film will lose like 60%, 65% of its business on a second weekend where the marketing's just been taken down a little bit. To lose that much was monumental. It suggested straight away that the word of mouth wasn't working and the Flash movie just wasn't, for whatever reason, just wasn't resonating with audience. And that's ultimately how it played out. That, I mean, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny came out on the Flash's third week, and the Flash was down to number 8 in the chart. Number 8 in the chart. In fact, it had dropped out the top 10 altogether by its fourth weekend as Insidious, The Red Door, Sound of Freedom and Joyride came along to take places in the top 10. By the time The Flash completed its US cinema run, $108 million, a really poor performance against what Warner Brothers had hoped for it. Perhaps the film deserved a little bit more, but there was a degree of multiverse fatigue in the midst of all of this. It's also, while some comic book movies were really doing particularly well in this time, there were some notable casualties as well. But The Flash was falling hard. It did $163 million outside of the US as well, and a worldwide gross $271 million. There was no chance there was going to be a Flash 2. And, I mean, the Fantastic Beasts franchise was also shuddering to a close at this stage as well. And some of the certainties that Warner Brothers had pinned its strategy on were no longer seeming to pay off. Thank goodness the Barbie movie came along to dig the studio out of something of a hole. It took, nearly 40 years to bring a Flash movie to the screen. When it did come, it was embroiled in corporate problems, in criminal problems, and all sorts of problems, really. And it would be wrong to suggest it had been purely hampered by the boardroom, but I don't think that the ecosystem around the film helped it at all. Did it deserve to do better than it did? Well, you can be the judge of that. That this is one of those film stories, though, that I don't think for many people concerned has a particularly happy ending.
Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
And that brings me to the halfway point of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time. Apologies for my unexpected absence last week as well. I had been planning to record an episode, but personal circumstances have taken a degree of hold there. Still, I'm back now. And if you do like this podcast and don't mind tolerating it a little bit more and want to support it, there are a couple of ways I'd really appreciate you doing so. The financial way is to go to patreon.com/SimonBrew. If you put some coins in the pot there, you get the podcast early and ad-free pretty much every week. Not last week, but there were circumstances. You also find out the gossip of what we're up to behind the scenes too. And I mean, it's going to be quite a busy time for us at Film Stories, so quite a bit of information hopefully will be landing there in due course. Costing you absolutely nothing is to leave ideally a hugely positive review at your podcast home of choice. Stuff like that is really hugely appreciated, particularly for independent podcasts like this. Thank you to everyone who's done that. If you wouldn't mind doing it, it's massively, massively appreciated. Likewise, if you can leave ideally a hugely positive review, stuff like that is absolute gold dust and massively, massively appreciated. I also have print magazines for sale. I am a print magazine nerd, and thus I make independent film print magazines. You can find those at store.filmstories.co.uk, but I've waffled too much for the parish notices. I'm already running miles behind on this episode, so let me crack on with the next of the films I'm going to talk about in this episode of Film Stories. And in fact, it's one in this case that hasn't actually been made. Let me play you a clip from a trailer from a TV show, and I'm going to come to the story of this the other side.
We have reason to believe that by the end of the day, an attempt will be made on David Palmer's life.
An international crisis is about to explode.
First African-American with a real shot at the White House.
And counterterrorism expert Jack Bauer will have just 24 hours to stop it.
If Palmer gets hit, it'll tear this country apart.
Now, every second is crucial.
There may be an element inside the agency involved with a hit on Palmer.
Every minute counts.
You're gonna blackmail a district director?
He's got information that I need.
And every hour,
Don't trust anybody.
the danger grows.
Not even your own people.
This fall,
Find a shooter, Jack.
Fox presents Kiefer Sutherland in a groundbreaking new series. An entire season of television
Who's the source?
devoted to one
You have no idea what you're getting yourself into here.
unforgettable
You've got 5 seconds.
day. 24. The clock starts ticking this fall on Fox.
So that was the trailer for season 1 of the TV show 24, which debuted in 2001 in the US, a show created by Joel Cerno and Robert Cochran, and notably starring Kiefer Sutherland as Jack Bauer. Now, I don't do many TV, in fact, that's the first time I've played a TV trailer, I think, on this podcast. But, I mean, the cinema influences were all over 24, and also the core idea behind the show of every minute you see in screen time is a minute of actual dramatic action, that the whole thing takes place in real time. Now, this was not a brand new phenomenon. The fans of the John Badham movie Nick of Time will be familiar with the fact that it did the same thing. That was a very early Johnny Depp headlined film. And so 24 really was an absolute sensation. A 24 episode show telling 24 consecutive hours in the life of the character Jack Bauer and the counter-terrorism unit that he worked for, and even appreciating the ad break. This still, it was a sensation. Over 200 episodes of this were made, including a television film by the name of 24 Redemption that took place, that was put together during writer's strike in the US. And it didn't take long, given the huge success of 24, for speculation about a film to bubble up. And that's where our film story kicks in. It's still film stories. I'm not one of these who's suddenly pivoting to TV, I'm afraid. I'm all about the movies. And so 20th Century Fox in June of 2006 inked a deal with Robert Cochran and Joel Cerno, the creators of the show, as well as its showrunner Howard Gordon. Brian Grazer of Imagine Entertainment, who's among the producers of the TV programme, was also part of this deal, and the idea was that they would make a 24 movie, and they were planning to make it really very, very quickly. That the deal was announced in June of 2006, and the idea was that it was Cochran and Cerno would write a screenplay for the film. They'd get to work on the story in late summer 2006, and then they'd have to stop when season 6 of 24 went into production. So they were looking to do this film in the narrow window that was available between seasons of the show. Now, I should say that 24 season 5 was arguably the high point of the programme. I will spoil absolutely nothing on this podcast, but it was a moment where the ratings and just the chatter about the show was very much at its highest. So Kiefer Sutherland's salary was heading towards its highest at that point as well. But the idea was that Fox would have a draft of a screenplay by early winter 2006, and then by late January 2007 they'd have the early ratings in place for the new season of the show, because seasons of 24 began at the start of the year. And so if Fox wanted a bit of extra confidence to press ahead with a 24 movie, it was just going to wait for the first couple of episodes to go out. Is the audience still there? If it was, the plan then would have been to shoot the film between season 6 and 7 of the show, at the production of them, in 2007. That way you could have had a movie on the big screen in 2008. So this iteration of the 24 movie, though, would have, it just would have changed the rules a little bit. It would have zeroed in on Kiefer Sutherland's Jack Bauer character, inevitably, although in summer 2006, when it was first talked about, Sutherland was reported to have not signed on to star in a film at that point, but as executive producer of the show and the face of the show, it was pretty inevitable that he would. And there was also talk about the film doing what the TV show couldn't. The demands of shooting 24 episodes of TV in one calendar year meant that 24 rarely left the California area. It was staying close to the studios and the studio facilities. The idea of going on location was pretty much a no-no. There just wasn't the time to do it. However, if they were going to do a film, well, then they could go elsewhere. And there was an idea that the film version could leave America and move to the UK, as in fact the television movie ultimately would. I've rarely seen so many Union Jacks draped across a screen just to reinforce the fact of where you are, but that notwithstanding, that's not what this film story is about. And so Fox at this point was, it was mining its TV shows. It had scored an early success towards the end of the 1990s with the first X-Files movie, subtitled Fight the Future. That has a marvellous moment set in the UK where there's a butler and we all talk like that, and that kind of thing. But it was noodling the idea of doing a second X-Files movie. And there was also the Simpsons movie that was on the horizon, facing a similar kind of challenge to 24. That is, the annual production of the TV show alone didn't leave much of a gap to make a film with the same personnel on top of that, but still Fox was keen just to get a Simpsons movie somehow in cinemas. Now, Kiefer Sutherland's involvement was fairly quickly in the end confirmed after first word rose of a 24 movie. And so as we headed into winter 2006, he was there. He's saying he was reinforcing this plan. We want to shoot it between the 6th and the 7th season. We want to travel a lot more, show some different locations. He said all of those things are exciting for us. Yet it didn't take too long for this to fall apart. By April of 2007, Kiefer Sutherland was telling a horrible British tabloid newspaper that the challenges of keeping the TV show going and keeping the scripts coming and keeping it made and also developing a film in tandem with that were just simply too challenging. He was quoted as saying to the horrible tabloid, "It's impossible to ask writers to work on the show and then come up with an amazing film we can shoot in the break between series." And so, it was the Simpsons movie problem. One of the things about the Simpsons movie was it basically said in the end to have been 3 different episodes of the show just mashed together. You didn't really have the option to do that with 24. And this relentless pace of the need to make the TV show would continue to be a stumbling block. And so, it was only really after the show's initial run came to an end with its 8th season that space opened up for Fox to take a proper look at things again. Now, the last episode of 24 season 8, with ratings falling but the show still wildly popular, screened in the US in May 2010. But what Fox faced this time was it had time, but also it had slightly less popularity to play with. And so it was a little bit more of a gamble. That said, in April 2010, the word was that the script was actually done. Sutherland was keen again, and he was reinforcing this idea that had gone on throughout discussion of the 24 film, that this was not going to mirror the real-time aspect of the show anymore. It wouldn't be a 2-hour movie that just played out for 2 hours of real-time action, not least because the title 2 wouldn't be a particularly good movie title for a 24 show. Instead, the idea was that it was still going to be 1 day of action. It would still contain it to a single day. Think of Training Day or something like that. But it was going to remove the straitjacket, the hook really, of the show, depending which way you wanted to look at it, in that every minute that we were watching reflected 1 minute in the life of the characters. Now, Fox then pulled something of a handbrake turn because it didn't cancel the movie. Instead, by June of 2010, the rumour mill was saying that not only are we going to get a 24 movie, it's now going to cross over with Die Hard 5. That the 5th Die Hard film was going to see Bruce Willis's John McClane share the big screen with Kiefer Sutherland's Jack Bauer. The working title of the film, Die Hard 24/7. You can kind of see what they did there. And this was slightly more than a rumour. Apparently it had a bit of substance to it. But what it would lead Fox to the path of was a simple choice. Does it want to make Die Hard 24/7, or would it want to press ahead with a Die Hard 5 instead, A Good Day to Die Hard as it happened, and then explore other options for 24? And it went ahead with the terrible A Good Day to Die Hard instead, although A Good Day to Die Hard made reasonable money, really. It was just a low point for that particular franchise. And so 24 was a bit back in limbo. And so we rumble through 2010 and momentum seems to be lost. But then Fox, by the end of 2010, had a script, but it wouldn't give a green light to it. Now, Billy Ray, a previous guest on this very podcast, had, it turned out, been working on a screenplay since early 2010. Now, Fox hadn't been particularly keen on the script that Billy Ray put together, but still, there was a moment where the 24 movie was said to have attracted the attention of the late Tony Scott. Scott was making films for 20th Century Fox at this point. The script appeared to cross his desk at some stage, and he was keen to come up with an idea with Sutherland that could work for the movie. Now, quite what traction that had, and it popped up in an interview at Assignment X at the end of 2010, Well, it wasn't particularly clear. And in fact, Howard Gordon, the showrunner of the TV show, remember, would say at the end of 2010 that he just wasn't involved with it anymore. He was quoted as saying, "The movie's something now that I'm not engaged or involved in. The rumours are," he said, the showrunner telling you the rumours, are that Tony Scott has an idea that he's going to run it by, or has run it by, Kiefer Sutherland, and I don't know what the status of it is. Well, it didn't happen, and Tony Scott's life ended tragically not too long afterwards. Gordon had instead moved on to another TV project at this stage, the show Homeland, which would also be a huge success. There's not been a movie of that to this stage either. But by December 2011, the 24 talk was back up. And now it was another Die Hard link. Mark Bombach, who'd penned screenplay for Die Hard 4, was said to be working on a new script for a 24 movie. However, Kiefer Sutherland was busy again, and he was busy with a television schedule. So that all-encompassing schedule that blitzed 9-10 months of his year. Now it was for a TV show called The Touch, and he had to fulfill his commitment to that show first. And that wiped out any hope Fox had of shooting the film in 2012, which it had explored. The scheduling right throughout was going to be a problem. And it's not that there weren't filmmakers interested. Antoine Fuqua, who's since got a training day, I just mentioned one of his films. He's also done the Equalizer trilogy, of course. But by this stage, he was the person who was going to direct. He was going to look at a script that basically brought together what Mark Bombach and Billy Ray had done. And so there seemed to be a path forward. There was a 24 movie back up and running. Only it wasn't going to be, because let's move now. So we move forward another 3 months. Now we're in March 2012, and what do you know? It looks like the whole thing was off and nobody was in a good mood about it. This all landed in a report at one of the Hollywood trade sites, The Wrap, and it talked about how Kiefer Sutherland was said to be furious. That's in quote marks, hence I gave that extra inflection for you. He was furious, I did it again, that Fox had pulled the movie fairly late in the day, it seemed. And the problem here was said to be money, that 20th Century Fox at this stage wasn't keen to spend any more than around $30 million on the negative for the film. Now, at one stage, Sutherland was said to have been paid $40 million for his salary for the TV show, but $30 million for the entire film, I mean, that's relatively cheap, even by early 2012 standards. However, Sutherland, along with producer Brian Grazer, wanted more than that. They argued we need $40 million to do that. And it wasn't even clear if it was going to leave America on that kind of money, but they just felt they needed a little bit more. Now, just to give some kind of parallel, I think this was around the time that the first Jack Reacher film was happening, and that cost around 60, I think, with Tom Cruise headlining. You'd imagine Tom Cruise took a fair amount of that change. I've covered Jack Reacher on this podcast before. Still cheap then if it was 40 million, but also sort of Sutherland's window for filming was cited as a problem as well. And in fact, the Wrap report quoted a spokesman as it happened for 20th Century Fox, and he confirmed that the movie was on hold and said it was related to timing. As the Fox spokesman said, we're still working on a script and hope to make it when Kiefer next has time. But this all came down to timing, he insisted, and 7 weeks is not enough time to prep a movie like this. So there's a clue as to the timescale they are working to. Because of Sutherland's commitment, it would have been a fairly truncated pre-production for a fairly, ideally intensive action thriller, and so Fox pulled the plug at that point. However, in the same Wrap article, there was, let's just say, a counterpoint put forward. To quote the article, it said, insiders on the project refuted Fox's version of the situation. According to them, the Fox television star, that would be Kiefer Sutherland, feels insulted, I added that Fox has offered him a relatively measly salary of $1 million to do the movie. Then there was an update on the article, and we're back to a Fox insider. And a Fox insider says that fee was proposed, but it came in the context of negotiations over the fee, which is weighted towards a reward on the back end. And in another round of negotiations, the insider said that Fox offered Kiefer Sutherland $2 million to make the movie. Now, $2 million I would happily make a 24 movie for. I am willing to appear as Jack Bauer for that kind of money. It's well below the market rate for Kiefer Sutherland, however, at least as a television star. Part of, I'd imagine, Fox's calculation was, Does movie star Kiefer Sutherland draw the same kind of appeal? Clearly, it wasn't willing to write that much of a check to find out, and so it seemed to be back in limbo by March of 2012, but by April 2012, this is as twisty and turny as the show, really, Sutherland would then confirm that, the 24 movie was back on. Now we're planning to shoot it at the end of 2012. So by December 2012, the 24 movie would be going. And Sutherland was quoted as saying, and this was on The Late Show, I think it was very difficult for us to get a script in order. We had done 200 episodes of the show, and to try and create some kind of finale in a 2-hour film was difficult, but we finally gotten that in order, and now we're juggling schedules, Sutherland said. So there was something to just the time slot that Sutherland had to make the film. He also argued that now they were trying to do the film with the several months of planning they actually felt that it needed. So they were in tandem on that instead of having to fit this pre-production into a 6-7 week cycle, Fox Insider said 7 weeks, Sutherland said 6, they had the time just to do it properly. But that shooting date just came and went, and with a fair amount of radio silence, really. And so Sutherland was off doing other projects. And what was going to happen with 24? Well, Fox had a decision to make. Do you go with a movie or do you go back to television? And it decided television. That it was the era where it was resurrecting some of its older shows for limited series. So it didn't want to commit to another 24 episodes of 24. That sounded expensive. But a shorter run where you could skip a couple of hours here and there, that's not a bad idea. And so Fox, in the summer of 2013, announced a limited series. This was now going to be called 24 Live Another Day, a sort of season 9 of the show, just not one that ran to quite inevitably the same amount of time as the original seasons of 24, nor was it the movie. But 24 Live Another Day was going to take precedence. And Sky reported at this stage that the shorter format will not damage the show, said Fox Entertainment chairman Kevin Riley. And here we go. Kevin Riley then added that, quote, plans for a 24 movie had been scrapped because producers thought a 2-hour movie would not do it justice. So that was that. It was done. The 24 movie story was completely over and no film made, and that's a nice bow at the end of our tale. Aha! Live Another Day turned out to be something of a help, though, because this limited season 9 went down really quite well, and the response to that was strong. And so there was briefly then a resurgence of, let's do a 24 movie. Now, this petered out again over time, and the clue as to why comes with Fox instead doubling down on the television roots of the show and gambling on another TV series, this time without Kiefer Sutherland involved, that it would be a spin-off show by the name of 24 Legacy. There's a colon in the midst of that, surely. And that was running between 2015 and 2017. The plug was eventually pulled on it, but this time, at the end of that, Fox said it had further plans for more things to do with 24. The thing is, though, none of those seem to be coming to any kind of fruition whatsoever. So the 24, I mean, those further 24 spin-offs, they just weren't happening. They didn't appear, or for whatever reason. And so, I mean, it just looked like that was that. Right up until a little twist at the end in July of this very year, July 2024, just weeks before this was actually being recorded, Deadline reports that 20th Century and Imagine Entertainment are in early development on a feature adaptation of the hit Fox series 24. Now, 20th Century is Fox, just under now Disney ownership. And so Disney in recent times has been going through some of the Fox library. We've seen a new Planet of the Apes film. We've seen a new Alien film. We've got a new Alien TV show coming. And now it looks like the fickle finger of fate is pointing in the direction of a new 24 movie. Now, Brian Grazer, the co-founder of Imagine Entertainment, is also working on a new Backdraft movie as well. And, I mean, it's just very slight, the information on this latest iteration of the film. It's not been confirmed whether Kiefer Sutherland is involved at any level, whether he will return to play Jack Bauer in it. It's likely to be based in and around the counter-terrorism unit once again. But will this version of the 24 movie happen? Well, this is a first for this podcast because I've effectively done a film story on a movie that's unmade, where the story's ending doesn't quite appear to have been written. What I can tell you is that, it's 14 years now of conversations about 24. In fact, it's longer than that. It's 18 years. 18 years, as I said, of conversation of a 24 movie. And as I sit here in a dingy room in the West Midlands, here in the UK, there is no 24 movie yet. All we've got at the moment is the seedling that there is the potential of a new 24 film. Doesn't look like there's a TV show. We wait and see what happens. And that brings me to the end of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time. I've horribly overrun, so let me waffle through this as fast as possible. If I've not bored you completely, and there's a sporting chance I have, you can find more from me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Simon Brew. More on Film Stories at Twitter, Blue Sky at Film Stories. I think we're Film Stories Magazine UK on Instagram. We're on Threads as well. You'll find us on Facebook at Film Stories Online, youtube.com/Film Stories. And then if you go to store.filmstories.co.uk, you will find our print magazines and Blu-rays for sale. You can see me live as well on the 25th of September 2024. I will be in Birmingham at the Midlands Arts Centre here in the UK. If you search for MAC Birmingham, MAC Birmingham, tickets are on sale for Film Stories Live now. Hope to see lots of you there. That would be lovely. And then finally, if you go to filmstories.co.uk, that is our entertainment website that does not do clickbait. Imagine how hard it is for that to get noticed, and yet we're still going. We're still getting somewhere. We've got movie news, we've got TV news, we've got games, we've got features, we've got reviews, and no clickbait. You can hold me to that. I think, though, I've thoroughly outstayed my welcome. So the main thing, as always, is you all take care, you all look after yourselves, and I will be back soon with another bunch of Film Stories. Thanks, folks. I'll be back soon. Bye-bye.